Hi everyone and welcome to week 4. Can you believe we're a third of the way through the course already? So today we're looking at the prevalence of crime. We're going to discuss who are the victims and who are the offenders. This is the last week that we're going to look at more statistic type things. From next week we're going to start getting into the nitty-gritty with some interesting stuff, and we start off with street crime next week. So what are we going to be doing today? Well, today there's going to be lots of stats and graphs. So when you're taking notes, you need to take notice of the big trends. So I want you to look at the graph or the graphs and look at what the trend is that the graph is describing. We need to know what's happened in the past, what's happening now, and use that to try and figure out what's going to happen in the future. All right. So how much real crime is there? Well, we have a dark figure, and that does not help us to know. We don't know what the dark figure of crime is, so how can we know how much real crime there is? We can estimate how many people commit different types of crime, but we can only rely on police statistics. We need to ensure we calculate rates. Do you know why? Well, we calculate rates at a number per 100,000. And why do we do that? Well, you have a think about the different populations of different towns. If you come from a really, really small town and there's not many people there, and this small town's had 3 break-ins, then you look at a big city like Brisbane or the Gold Coast and they've got a figure of 11,000 break-ins. Well, how can we compare them? So we turn it into a number out of 100,000, and then that way we can compare everybody. And we might find that those 3 break-ins in the small country town is actually at a higher rate than it is in Brisbane that's had 11,000. So that's what we do. So the ABS, which is the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and the AIC, which is the Australian Institute of Criminology, don't publish data on an overall national crime rate. That's because the offences can vary slightly or even a lot across states and territories, rendering it difficult to meaningfully compare them across all jurisdictions. But they do publish data on key crimes of importance that pretty much remain the same overall. So let's have a look at overall crime in Queensland. Okay, you can see the figures through there. This covers all of Queensland by region, and what it shows you, if you look at the side here where it says change in rate, it tells you that in the last year the crime rate has decreased by 1.2%. So it's gone down by 1.2%. But in the preceding 9 years, it's gone up by 8.1% overall. So have a look at some of these larger figures down the side here of some of the areas. Toowoomba region, it's gone up by 41.5%. So you can see some regions have had a very, very big change in their rate. So how can we make sense of this? Because there's substantial variation in crime rates across different regions. So for instance, Brisbane South and West have had a decrease in the big city, but then we're looking at a smaller regional centre like Toowoomba that's had a massive increase. So we need to be able to figure out how we're going to use this and look at what is a longer term trend. So we can look at it like this, where we're looking at the crime rates, all offence rates for Queensland since 2001. So while the overall crime rate has increased by 8.91% in the past 9 years, it actually decreased 18% between 2001, which is way back down here, and 2018. So there's actually been a much bigger decrease than there has been an increase. So if you look at this, does this suggest to you that crime is out of control? It would suggest not. So the Australian violent crime rate at the side is in this graph. So at the side you can see where it says, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but I'm pointing to it, on the x-axis, the y-axis, sorry, rate per 100,000, and you've got year on the x-axis. So how does that fit into a small country town? Well, if you think about how many people there are in India compared to Australia, we want to compare rates between countries, this is what we use to do it. Everyone uses rates per 100,000. So if we have a murder rate of 600 in a population of 1 million, the rate per 100,000 is 60. In Australia, we have around 250 murders in a population of 25 million. So the rate there is 1. Okay, so since 1996, the rate of assault in Australia has been far higher, and you can see sexual assault here and robbery here, than any other type of violent crime. At its peak in 2007, the assault rate was 840 per 100,000 of the population. In 2010, the rate fell to 766 victims per 100,000. So we're looking for homicide at 1 per 100,000. So really it's at the lower end. Homicide and kidnapping abduction. So homicide and kidnapping are both way down the bottom here. That yellow line, you can just see the grey behind it for homicide. They're low volume crimes. In 2009 and 10, they continued to be low, and they have continued to be low ever since then. Okay, the rate of sexual assault is going up, but that could be because of changes in reporting. Robbery is decreasing or flattening out a little bit now, but it's at a much lower rate than sexual assault. So again, we're looking at this over the years. We've got on the y-axis here, we've got the rate per 100,000. Homicide in Australia has declined over the last 25 years, and it's currently the lowest on record. So we've got the incident, the victims and the offenders, and it's all very low. So it's around 1 to 1.5 per 100,000. Very, very low. Okay, trends in homicide. So again, this one is calculated by rate. So we look at how low the numbers are. Now, the reason that we put this one in here is that it covers two very significant spikes in homicide. The first one was down here in about 1918 or 1915 was quite high, and then it dropped, and then about 1919 it went up again severely. We can see that in the 40s there was a big dip here in the early 1940s, and then it went up again. So we see a higher rate at these times. What can we equate to why the rate was so low, or why did it dip so suddenly? Well, it dipped because we had 2 world wars. So in 1915, we can see between 1915 and 18, the rate has dipped suddenly. Then when all the men came home from war, it went up again. Around the time of the Great Depression, early 1930s, there's another spike, and then it dipped again. And then around World War II, from 1939, it went up and then it dipped again. Okay, so this happens because, unfortunately, men do most of the killing. So they went away to war, the rate dips, they come home from war and the rate goes up. Send them all overseas and the rates all drop. Okay, the women were the ones who stepped up to the mark in the war and kept the country going, but they didn't keep the murdering going, thank goodness. There's big spikes in the 90s, and apparently this is very, very common in all countries. Not really sure why, but maybe you know something that was going on in the 90s, but this is very, very common that those spikes were there. So homicide in Queensland, if it decides that it wants to go down, there they are. This is specific to Queensland only. So looking at this graph, is violent crime, specifically murder, getting worse? No, it's coming down. So again, we had this big spike in the early 2000s, and since then it's been coming down. Okay, so it's very interesting that and very insightful that we look at these things so that we can understand what's going on out there in the community. So we analyse to make assumptions and predictions. This is for the whole of Australia in 2010. The total is 213, which is really small. So that's down the bottom there, number 213. That's how many murders there were, and this is where it all happened. Where do most people get killed? They get killed in a home, in a dwelling, whether that's the offender's dwelling or the victim's dwelling, but they're getting killed in a dwelling. Where is the next most common place? Well, out in the street, on the footpath. That would be covering nightclub districts where it happens, outside nightclubs and things like that. So why is the most common place in the home? How can we explain why the most offences when it comes to killing are happening in the home? Well, could it be because you know the person? The person most likely to murder you is friends, acquaintances and family. So this makes sense. Describe how a murder would happen on a street or a footpath. Well, I guess you could talk about fighting, intoxication, a drug deal gone bad. So the take-home message from this is don't go home. Stay on the bus, catch public transport and you're safe there, or stay out on the street, but just don't go home. Retail, 5% in retail. How would this come about? Well, it could be robberies gone wrong where people become victims. Recreational, for 3%, that's parks and beaches, etc. Okay, so, and an outbuilding is something that is still on the residential land, but it's just not the main dwelling. So as you can see, we are less safe at home than we are being out in public. Thank goodness here when we're looking at gender and age that there's not a lot of children, and the gender is pretty even in the younger years, except for the 10 to 14 age group where the females just tend to drop off and it's negligible. But guys, what's happening here in all these age groups? The victims are men, overwhelmingly higher than women. So like I said, guys, don't go home. Stay on the bus. That's the safest place for you to be. All right. This is looking at trends in Australia compared to other places in the world. And this is why we need to all calculate exactly the same way, because it takes into account differences in population. So Mexico, look at that. Look how high Mexico is compared to other countries. The United States is only third. You would have expected that they would be a little bit further up the chain. We're down here. Australia, way down here. Look at these countries right down the bottom. Very, very safe countries to live. But I'm going to give you about 10 seconds. I'd like you to have a look at this list of countries across here and see if you can notice anything. What I'm hoping that you've noticed while you've been looking at these countries, apart from the fact that a lot of them are places I would love to go, is what countries are missing. Who's missing here? So just to give you a few heads up of what countries are not represented here, missing are Iran, China, Russia, Iraq, all African countries, and North Korea. Why aren't they here? Well, they don't like to report to the UN, so they simply don't report. Most South American countries are missing. So you can see that while we can get some really great statistics here for these countries that have reported to the UN, I suspect that those countries that are very secretive about their rates and don't want the rest of the world to know what's going on in them would be filling out this end and spreading it further this way, and we'd be seeing a lot more very big blue lines here. So while it's great that we've got these international comparisons, we need to keep in mind that not all countries are going to be represented, and that's going to throw it out a little bit. Okay, between 2010 and 17, the rate of sexual assault increased 18.6%. Sorry about this. Some of my overlays didn't come up when I had it on slideshow, so I'm just showing it here. So you need to be aware that sexual assault includes a broad range of behaviours. So we can see this upward line here from 2010 to 2017 of sexual assault, and it's gone up quite a bit. Okay, so it's up over 100, up from maybe around 80. Meanwhile, we can see this robbery lines coming down, and homicide and abduction are staying the same. So why is sexual assault going up? Well, the proportion of people victimised in the past 12 months is the same. It's the fact that reporting to police has decreased. Sorry, let me have a look at this again. So the rate has gone up, but reporting to police has gone down. So there could be an increase in the reporting of historical offences. So we got to a stage where we had a lot of people reporting because they felt safe to report and they felt supported, but it's now gone down again. And that is reporting what's just happened. So the increase could be that there is a lot more historical offences going on in there. And here is our sexual offences for Queensland. As you can see, overall, they have taken a downward trend. Okay, even though we can see here that it is actually going up. So there's been an increase in the rate of sexual assault, but the reporting has gone down. Okay, that one's a little bit confusing to understand. And sexual assault is a hard one to understand because the reporting, it covers so many different types of assault, so the reporting can be a little bit misleading. Australian assault victims, gender and relationship to offender. All right. So if you have been assaulted and you are a female, you are more likely to have been assaulted by a family member, a known non-family member, than you are by a stranger, or this little bit down here that's not stated. So females are much more at risk of being assaulted by someone that they know, whereas males are much more at risk of being assaulted by someone that they don't know. Now, we've got to differentiate this from homicide. Homicide is more to do with people that are known to you, whereas assault is more from strangers. Okay, so this is held true till today. Now let's look at international comparisons of rape. So wow, we're right up there. We're number one. Highest rates of rape per 100,000 in this group of countries. But again, we are missing all of those other countries that didn't report their statistics. So why? Why are we so much higher than the US? Well, because people are prepared more to report it here because they feel safer to do so. So if you think about a country like Japan, it would be very shameful for a Japanese woman to report being raped. So it is less likely to be reported over there. But why are we 3 times the US rate and New Zealand too? Well, that's where the critical thinking comes in. The new laws here that we've got, or our laws here that we've got, mean that our definition might cover more stuff than other countries. So we might cover touching, harassment, and not just rape. So there's lots of different ways that someone could be sexually assaulted rather than just straight out penetrative rape. And those figures may all be included in the Australian figures, but not included in some of the others. Maybe women feel more supported and can report more. Cultural issues. Guys, when you were raised, did your parents ever sit you down and specifically tell you what consent is? Girls, did your parents ever sit you down and explain to you what you should expect of a man and what is acceptable behaviour? Parents do seem to struggle to have that conversation about what is okay and what is not. And we still seem to have a strong patriarchal culture. So unfortunately, we still have a lot of men who think that sexual assault is okay. And they think it's okay to just take what they want when they want. And that is an unfortunate part of any society. Think back to the fact that in some Middle Eastern countries, if there is a case of adultery, the woman will get stoned and the man will get off scot-free. So there are still those issues where there is a lack of equality in relationships. Okay, so what could explain Australia being number one? I've just gone through those points for you. The legal differences in the definition of rape, increased victim reporting, or maybe we have a problem with sexual violence. I really don't think that we have as big a problem as this graph would suggest. So I think it's more down to the last point that international comparisons are complex and we don't always know the answer. Okay, property crime. So now we're moving away from personal violence to property crime. So look at the whole of Australia. UEWI, unlawful entry with intent, motor vehicle theft, and we've got other theft. So in 2010, the rate of motor vehicle theft was 245 per 100,000, and that represented a 10% decrease from the following year. However, the most rapid decline occurred between 01 and 04, when it fell on average by 8% per year. Now, if we look at motor vehicle theft now, which is the green one, it seems to be staying fairly steady. That only goes to 2017. I would be very surprised if it hasn't gone up a little bit between then and now, because motor vehicle theft, whether it's just because the media is talking about it a lot more or whether it's gone up, it would be interesting to see. So the rate of other theft increased rapidly between 96 and 2000 before starting to decline. And in 2010, the rate of UE was 971 per 100,000, an overall decline of 56% since 1996. And some of the reasons that property crime can go down is because of technology, because we've got cameras everywhere, because people carry phones and film everything. So the technology can have a direct effect on rates coming down. But we need to remember overall that property crime is the most frequently occurring type of crime in Australia. And the medium and longer term trends show that it is stable or declining. That's not what the media would have you believe, as you well now know, that, that violent crime is the most prolific and is on the rise. So where else does property crime occur? Well, residential is a fairly big one. Retail, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Retail is the biggest at 30%. So what else occurs in retail apart from shoplifting? Well, you can get robberies of stores, you can get people having their handbags stolen. So there's a lot of other stuff going on there. Residential probably came second because we're tightening up our security at homes a little bit and it's a bit harder to get in. Transport. What's happening here? 6%. Think about, for property crime, vandalism. So painting all over trains, scratching in the windows, wrecking the seats on buses, stealing of your handbag if it's taken off the floor. So there's rather a lot of crime goes on the trains. So let's compare ourselves again, and I can stop that. Per 100,000 to other countries. Well, all of a sudden Denmark's up the top. But again, Japan is right down the bottom. So what does this say? Where are we? I've lost this. Oh, that's Austria. So we're there. We're about, what, number 6? Number 6. And there can be lots of reasons why this could be a big reporting. A lot of property crime and burglary, they get reported simply because people need to have that police number so that they can claim on their insurance. And that is very, very common. Not that the police can actually do very much, but simply because they have to have that number so they can claim on their insurance. All right, what are the imprisonment rates? Well, at June 2012, the national imprisonment rate was 168 prisoners per 100,000 compared to 167 in 2011. This is adults only. Males were 93% of the total prisoner population in 2012, females 7%. And that's changing. And between the 10 years prior to 2012, the total number of prisoners increased 31%, and male prisoners increased 29%, and female prisoners increased by 48%. So in 2012, we had just shy of about 29,500 prisoners. In the 2018-19 period, there were 43,028 adult prisoners. So not quite double, but you can see from here how this total number of prisoners is just going up and up and up. It just continues to go up. Unsentenced prisoners, you'll hear this talked about a lot. They can be sentenced. They are prisoners who are on remand waiting to go to court. So they haven't even actually been proven guilty or innocent. They're simply on remand and not sentenced. So there's your sentence and there's your total. Males still accounted at 2017 for 93 and females 7. That's a decrease of 4% for females from the previous year. That has now changed by 2020 to about 92 and 8. So girls, we've got a lot of work to do if we're going to catch up to the boys. Maybe this is one area that we really don't want to catch the boys. Okay, so imprisonment rates 18 years and over by sex, by age group. This is what's called a bell curve. So it goes up, it peaks, and it comes down the other side. That's for the males. Females, very much less pronounced. As you can see, the bulk of prisoners for both males and females are in this group here. So they are the people who've done silly things back here when they were young, and they have been sentenced and they are still in prison. They hit 40 and they start to decrease, either because they've been released or because they are no longer offending, which is quite common, to the point where we don't have as many prisoners down here. Unfortunately, because of technology, we've got a lot of people who are entering prison now at a much later age because they're getting caught for crimes that they may have committed 20 or 30 years ago. So we do have a much higher aging population than we've ever had before, to the point where they actually do have aged care in prisons for older people. And younger prisoners actually can nurse them and learn how to be aged care workers, and that's something that they can go into when they leave prison. But we do have some very old people in prison, and it's becoming a growing problem. All right. So, America. You can see that they toddled along from 1920. Their incarceration rates were going up, and about 1980 they had 500,000 incarcerated Americans. When Ronald Reagan was president, we start to see the rates really starting to increase, because President Nixon was there and then he was removed, and the drug abuse became a really big deal. Oh, sorry, Nixon was back here in 1970. I'm thinking 1980, he was well gone by then. But drug abuse coming out of the 1960s, where drugs were really big, he proclaimed that drug abuse was public enemy number one. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan was the president, he declared a war on drugs, and the next big rise was the minimum sentences. So mandatory minimum sentences in the mid-1980s came in. So you could get caught with 0.5 gram of crack cocaine and you were automatically in prison for 2 years. Judges had no choice because it was mandated. Then in the mid-90s, we had the 3 strikes and truth in sentencing, and you can see that this population in prison is just going up and up and up and up. So this 3 strikes and truth in sentencing meant that if you did the same crime, or you committed a crime 3 times, on the 3rd time, you really did run the risk of being jailed for a very long time. There's some excellent podcasts out there, and one that I have listened to is called Ear Hustle. Ear as in listening ear hustle, set in San Quentin prison. And there was a guy that they interviewed a few years ago now, because it's been going for a while. And his third strike was he was on drugs. His third strike was to reach over the counter and grab a $20 note out of the till at a bottle shop. And for that, he got something like 40 years in prison. So truth in sentencing means that whatever you're sentenced to, that's what you're going to be doing. So they got really, really tough on crime. So in 2010, which was 10 years ago now, 2.3 million incarcerated Americans. I think that you'll probably find that there are more than that now, and they're just building prisons or having to find prisons at a huge rate, and they simply can't keep up with it. Okay, punitivity ratio. This is the last one that we're going to look at. We as the public are very punitive in how we think that prisoners should be dealt with, and that is very evident in America, where they believe that people who do the wrong thing should be incarcerated. Now, it's interesting, you can see Japan here running at number 3. They have a very, very punitive attitude towards people who commit crime. So what you will probably find is that's why they don't have a lot of crime, because their penalties are very, very high. So people just don't do it. Israel, Chile, and Australia, we're right down here, okay, at less than 0.2. So these are the countries down here that are not so punitive and are willing to use other types of punishment rather than just incarcerating people into prison, because it doesn't work. Okay, so it's interesting when you look at the countries, how they approach and feel about punishing people. So that is the first half. That completes part 1. We've only got the 2 parts, and in part 2 we're going to look more closely at offenders, juveniles and repeat victims.